Okay. Dressel sent me another dang yo-yo. This one's plastic though, and he didn't pay me to say anything, nor did he send me this yo-yo expecting any praise in return. All thoughts are original and my own. Okay, so the Apollo. Well, it's got a profile we're very familiar with. It started with the Assassin, then it went to the Emotion, then the Connection, and now we've got the profile of the Apollo. To be fair, it's a good profile. It's got nice, wide, round, and comfy rims. It doesn't have obnoxious walls that get in the way. It's just a good profile. But this one has the change that it's got a capped hub. We got a bubble yo-yo, and we also got this little ledge before the bubble comes out. And this inner design, this little print, this isn't actually engraved. This is screen printed. Something else, this is a palm yo-yo, or Delrin if you prefer. For the uninitiated, two types of plastics are used in yo-yo design the most. Polycarbonate, the most common material, is used in beginner models, loopers, and advanced hybrids that incorporate other materials, usually metals like aluminum and steel. See the Iceberg, Speedaholic, or Fast 201. And then Delrin, aka Palm, which tends to be used for more premium plastic yo-yos. And there are marginal differences between Delrin and polycarbonate. Based on what I could find, Delrin is slightly stronger and slightly denser than polycarbonate, but the big difference is how it feels in your hand. Delrin is incredibly smooth and soft feeling. If you've owned Delrin, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's straight up luxurious how nice Delrin feels. Sometimes it can be a bit chalky, but when it's done right, it's silk sheets with a string attached. I adore Delrin as a material just because it feels nice. But it's plastic. As a yo-yo material, plastic is sort of a novelty to me. For the vast majority of applications, it's arguably just better to use aluminum. Most of the time, what makes me seriously consider a plastic yo-yo isn't when I want a yo-yo and it happens to be plastic. It's when I want a plastic yo-yo. I don't own that many because of that. Apollo's neat though. It's big and wide like modern competitive monometals that are dropping right now. But how does it play? Well, the big thing, and I emphasize this, is that the Apollo weighs 67 grams, but it's nowhere near as bricky feeling and sluggish as some bimetals that weigh 65 grams. It's incredible how maneuverable and comfortable this yo-yo is to move around. It doesn't fight you, it doesn't lag, and it doesn't drag. In practice, this makes it a really hoppy and poppy yo-yo. Now, the natural pacing is a bit slower than the average yo-yo, I'd say. It's not quite as naturally quick as other yo-yos I own, but it's certainly maneuverable and comfortable. It almost feels like playing with a 4A yo-yo, but for 1A. It genuinely does feel like a little bubble at the end of the string sometimes. The Apollo has a quality about it that makes it very nice for flowy, comfortable tricks. The ones with little redirects and rolls, like rail combos, but without the part that makes them cool. Relevant to rail combos, I don't like how the Apollo plays for rail combos. It's maneuverable enough that it's not unpleasant, it actually flies through them nicely, but for once, it's the weight distribution of the Apollo that makes it blow out during rail combos. When you actually try to go fast with a rail combo, it's extremely easy for the Apollo to just hit a string too hard and die. I wouldn't say the Apollo is inherently unstable or weak, but it's kinda a perfect storm that's not great for rail combos. Its pacing isn't naturally super fast, so you gotta push it more than the average yo-yo. But when you push it in the way a rail combo makes you push, you bump the response bump and put more strain on the weight distribution because of the yo-yo. Bumping the response bump would normally be fine, it might cause a little tilt, but the Apollo's a capped yo-yo, and it's plastic, neither of which really helps prevent a yo-yo from tilting. Now, certain roll combos are fine with the Apollo. It mostly has to do with string hitting. I can feel confident in saying this because during zoning, the Apollo is generally pretty good. It's powerful and maneuverable enough that it can get through zoning combos rather handily. However, if you bump it just wrong, it completely flops. When I was recording tricks for this video, I was trying to hit a combo, and I kept having a problem where I would do a hop, bump the yo-yo with a string, and the yo-yo would instantly flop from vertical to 90 degrees. The same goes for when I tried learning that one Wukong Kong trick that Matthew Walston did during his nationals routine. Here's a clip on the screen. The Apollo just straight up disagrees with this trick. Every time I do the bounce, it'd rotate, or when I do the last lock for it, it would just flop. It's conflicting to me because generally I'd say the Apollo is good. The Apollo is solid, it's performant, and it's maneuverable, but it just bumps things wrong and dies. I'd say it's generally good for Zontals. It's wide, powerful, and maneuverable, so it's got all the sauce it needs. And it is solid for Zontals. I think in terms of a plastic yo-yo, it really is as good as it gets for Zontals, at least for now. For tech, the Apollo is honestly good, with the asterisk that it sort of depends on what sort of tech you're doing. If it's rolly tech or tech with minor hops and catching slacks, you're going to be fine. However, tech with rejections, or if you're trying to grab or land on a string that's particularly taut at a strange angle, that can cause the blowout I've been mentioning. Something else is that regens on the Apollo are either completely fine, or the yo-yo completely rotates direction. That's another thing. The Apollo is more apt than other yo-yos to just rotate. It's an inevitability with yo-yoing. Some of them sort of just rotate. You might notice it more with Zontals. But the Apollo likes to rotate more than other yo-yos. And now, okay, I know I'm being rough on the Apollo, but it is a genuinely good yo-yo. It's a good performing yo-yo. It just has its moments. I'd be dishonest if I opted to leave those moments out. And to be doubly honest, I don't really see a way to execute this type of yo-yo better. Full plastic with a wide design and hollow caps. I feel like most of the time, if this type of design were executed differently, it'd almost always not be given enough weight to be as powerful or as stable as the Apollo is. It would always be too light, outright anemic, or it would just be straight up shamelessly trying to cash out on an old nostalgic shape. It would just be a lame yo-yo with a gimmick tacked on for sales. Dressel did something special, making a wide, properly performant plastic yo-yo with caps. And I'll explain with the comparisons. Now, full disclosure, I don't have a lot of full plastic yo-yos, and I don't tend to grab them because I just generally prefer to spend my cash on metal yo-yos. So forgive me for basing my comparisons on yo-yos I myself consider to be slightly outdated. So I'll be comparing the Apollo to the old Speedaholic XX and the Top Yo Faceless. And I'll be starting with the Speedaholic XX. Now there's a real subtle difference in the way these two play that really comes forward because the Apollo is a capped yo-yo. Despite both of them being 67 grams or almost being 67 grams, the Apollo maneuvers differently than the Speedaholic maneuvers. The Apollo bounces and starts moving around a bit easier than the Speedaholic moves. The Speedaholic kind of has that classic rim-weighted sluggishness where it sort of drags. It's not super forward on the Speedaholic because it's plastic and the amount of material needed to add rim weight also just starts adding mid-weight and center weight, whereas the Apollo just doesn't really have that rim-weighted drag. In practice, for stuff like faster rail combos or abs combos, this gives the Apollo a more pleasant feeling. It just bounces easier for those abs combos. For rail combos, the Apollo kind of flies through them without fighting the yo-yoer. Though, worth noting, the Speedaholic is less prone to blowing out. It's got that frosted polycarbonate finish that also helps, so if it bumps your hand, it just won't blow out. But the Apollo is also a bit more likely to blow out over the Speedaholic. Though, the counterbalance to both of these is that the Apollo's got a 5, almost 6 millimeters on the width of the Speedaholic, which makes it way easier to catch. The maneuverability and catchability make the Apollo a bit more performant for Zontals, zoning, and hops than the Speedaholic. At least that's how it generally is. Both yo-yos are sort of in a similar performance bracket, but the Apollo's catchability kind of gives it a little extra edge in just a few small categories. And that's the benefit of not being a 5-year-old yo-yo. Also, the Apollo is just generally more pleasant to play with than the Speedaholic. So I'd say I prefer the Apollo to the Speedaholic. It's easy to work with a performance and fun gap. Now, onto the Faceless. I love the Faceless. Full disclosure, absolute banger. Especially in that video that Junyi Lin dropped. But compared to the Apollo, the two yo-yos have a very notably different presence on the string. The Apollo's hollowness is noticeable when compared to the Faceless, which feels very solid. The Apollo has more bounce and hop. It's a bit easier to move than the Faceless. Basically, Apollo's a bit more maneuverable than the Faceless, but I find the Apollo to be a bit less resilient than the Faceless. The Faceless has more power and a bit more stability, which gives it a bit more general gusto than the Apollo. It's not a huge gap where the Faceless can practically be punched mid-combo and the Apollo dies if you bump the response bump, but it's noticeable enough during rougher combos that I feel like I should at least comment about it. Ironically, again, the trade-off is that the Faceless is more narrow than the Apollo, which means it's just harder to hit the bigger hop and zoning combos. I'd say in general, the Apollo and Faceless are kind of similar in terms of performance, with a slight lean towards the Faceless, with them both having almost opposite pulls in either direction. One's more catchable and maneuverable, but the other's got more presence, stability, and power. To be honest, I do prefer the Faceless a bit more. I just find the Faceless a bit more reliable overall than the Apollo. Now, at one point, I was going to do a comparison to the AoE, but I found I couldn't really find a preference either way, and I was starting to repeat myself with the other comparisons, especially the maneuverability of the Apollo. So, just the one exception with the AoE is that it's about as catchable as the Apollo. And that's it for comparisons. Generally speaking, I find the Apollo to be a great yo-yo with a flaw. It's too easy to blow out, and the way it rotates is kinda lame. But it's important to comment about what it is. It's a wide, capped, fully plastic yo-yo. And for what it is, it's honestly as good as it gets. I can't think of a way I would personally improve on this design. It's not a lame sales gimmick that happens to be okay enough to tolerate spending money on. It's a good yo-yo with a neat design that does something interesting, which is something I appreciate. Do I think it'd be a bit better if it were metal and didn't have caps? Yeah. But the Apollo isn't that, and it probably wouldn't be as cool if it were that. Anyways, I put the Apollo squarely in A tier. It's a good yo-yo. Stay healthy, everyone. Adios.